Hello and welcome to Emsi webinars. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we have an exciting webinar following on from our green economy webinar, which was back about a month ago. So today we have Andy Durman, who is Emsi's UK Managing Director, and Duncan Brown, Emsi's Senior Economist, with us. During the course of the webinar, if you have any questions, please put them in the questions box on your control panel, and we will endeavour to get back to those at the end of the presentation if we have time. You will be receiving a follow-up email with the recording and the slides from today's presentation, so make sure you keep your eyes open for that. So without any further ado, I will hand over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Debbie, and hello everyone. Great to talk to you all again today. They've let me out of Basingstoke, and I'm coming to you live from my parents' house in East Sussex, having had a lovely morning of history, wandering around Battle Abbey and the battlefields from the Battle of Hastings and 1066 and all that. So fresh, full of history. But today is more about the present. So excited to have Duncan join me once again. Hi, Duncan. How are you?
Very good, thank you, Andy. I'm at home because I'm at work, whereas you've been on leave, so but I'm enjoying it because I always enjoy working at Emsi. That's the great thing.
Great stuff. Glad to hear it. It is recorded for future purposes. So hello everyone. For those of you familiar with us, then welcome back and thanks for joining us for another session. Any newbies out there, welcome and thank you for joining us. So we mentioned last time about some exciting news that we're just working through as an organization, that is the merger with our counterparts at Burning Glass, and that's progressing very nicely, and I'm sure more details will emerge as that works through, but lots of exciting plans in place there. The great thing is, as two organizations, we are very much aligned on the same mission, and our goal is very much to help you and your organizations to make better decisions as they relate to the labour market, through illuminating key facets of what's happening in the labour market and the jobs market. So today is a great example again to continue to showcase and share what we're seeing in the data that we're collating and bringing together. But before we dive into today's topic, Duncan, you're going to give us a quick roundup of just what's happening in the broader economy for us as we've been tracking on a monthly basis. So over to you.
Yeah, a very quick couple of slides that we've been running for a few months now. Really to just keep a handle on what's going on, and the sort of the news is all unalloyedly good, which is great. I see yesterday the IMF released its revised growth projections for this year, and they forecast that the UK will grow at 7%, rivaled only by the US, and so I never thought I'd see growth rates at that level, that you can add that to the sort of the things I never thought I'd see over the past year, really. So there you go. But so the chart on the left here has the black line is the unemployment rate, which we can see its fall has decelerated slightly, but it's still on the downward trend, and is kind of seems so far to be past a peak. And that's good. The purple line is the vacancy rate, so that's the number of vacancies as a share of the number of people looking for or in work, and you can see that that's getting back towards normal territories. Vacancies are published a bit more quickly than unemployment data, and I should say that the most recent month's data, which is subject to change, showed an even bigger increase. So it's actually quite possible that we could be in sort of way above normal territory for vacancies, which is what we'd hope to see if the recovery is as robust as the IMF expects it to be. And then the redundancy rate is pretty much back down to where it was in normal times in sort of the 6 or 7 years before the pandemic struck. And as the subtitle notes there, HR1 data, which is collation of the forms that larger employers have to fill out when they plan to make restructurings, suggests that the number of redundancy situations is at a really low level compared to normal years, and it feels like after a period when they'd spiked, actually we're now sort of into an overhang territory where they're not at all. The beverage curve, which is my slightly confusing chart on the right, summarizes the unemployment and vacancy data in a different way by plotting them together. And the sort of the purple line is what's been happening with COVID, whereas the others are different periods. So you've got the green line, which is 2006 to 2009. So it starts off with a cluster around 5% unemployment, and then you have the recession hitting and taking us to sort of unemployment at around 8%, with vacancies falling alongside that. Then the long, slow recovery from 2010 to 2016, and then the period from 2016 to just before the pandemic, where unemployment fell as vacancies went higher. And you can see that in normal times we were on a sort of a diagonal line that those three areas represent, and then COVID struck and vacancies collapsed. Unemployment didn't move at first, probably because of furlough, and then started to increase, but alongside vacancies. And you can see that now the combination of vacancies and unemployment has taken a slap bang to that diagonal space that we're used to inhabiting. And so we're back to where the labour market was in these unemployment and vacancy terms around about 2016, which wasn't too bad, basically. And so providing that as furlough ends, that doesn't worsen again, actually, we've come through it in a lot better shape than we were anticipating. But if you can go on to the next chart, next slide, please, Andy. So this is the other slide that we've been keeping an eye on, and this is industry by industry, comparing the situation on the latest data to the situation before. The sort of the horizontal line in each case is 100%. The green line is the percentage of workers that have been furloughed as a percentage of the workforce that's out there. And then the black wavy line is the number of active job postings for each industry compared to the 100% mark, which was what it was like in February last year. And the first thing and most important thing to say is that in all industries now, demand is either at the place it was at before the pandemic started or is above it. And in many cases, it's above. If you look at construction, although it's tailed off a bit, it's still above. The same with a few other areas in the production sector as well. But the really interesting one is accommodation and food services. Having spent more than a year in the doldrums, and accommodation and food services is a big employer in our economy, it's now way above where it was before the pandemic. And so actually demand is bounced fully back there and is, if anything, playing catch up. And this is good to see because it aligns with these stories that we see about employers struggling to fill these kind of roles. The interesting thing is that in most industries, furlough has already kind of moved to being a very tiny corner of the labour market. The exceptions to that remain accommodation and food services, arts, entertainment and recreation, and other service activities. These are all the sectors that have been most affected by lockdown restrictions. And really, bear in mind this data only goes to the end of May, have only really been gathering pace in June and July. As many of you will be aware, the terms on which furlough is offered are becoming less favourable as the months go on. And so that, taken together with the sort of the high levels of demand that we can see, you would assume would suggest that furlough should be coming off pretty sharply as we get the June and July data. And so that remains the one to watch. If it doesn't tail off as quickly as we're expecting, then that may bode for some bad news on the unemployment front, because it may suggest that some of those jobs are not really there anymore, and employers are just keeping them there for the funding while it's available. But we can only wait and see.
Or there are employees that have sought elsewhere and are working off the system. Let's just say.
Yes, indeed, it could go. Yes, it's there are many possible answers, and we can only watch and wait really at this point.
But the reality is, the next couple of months will pretty much tell us everything about that.
I think so. I mean, although furlough goes to the end of summer, given the way that demand is looking, if employers genuinely have use of those workers, why would you be keeping them on furlough? So I think if in a month or two's time, so this was May data, by the time we get the July data, if we're still seeing significant numbers in furlough, then there's something going on that will have to work itself out eventually.
Great, thank you, Duncan. Appreciate the update. I know everyone's been keen to just hear the headlines, and of course a lot of good news, and talk about pressures in the labour market, and this bears out. But obviously a few nuances still to work through. So thank you very much. So let's get into the meat of today's session, and a quick recap. Last month, for those of you that were able to join us or have been able to see the recording, we started talking about the green economy, a big focus point of the Build Back Better agenda, and of course a key part of what our future economy and our current economy is going to look like. So we spent a bit of time really just trying to understand, well, what do we mean by the green economy? And once defining that, start to think about some headline trends that we could see, and we shared those last time. And just by way of a recap, or if you haven't been able to catch up, we talked about how whilst in general, when you close your eyes and think of the green economy, you might immediately think of green industries, so the types of businesses, renewable energy businesses, those sorts of things. Actually, that's only a tip of an iceberg that actually goes a lot deeper into our economy. We had identified that there are now a number of jobs that are quite specifically green roles, and probably more importantly, a set of skills that are emerging across the labour market that are really fueling the green agenda and greenification of our economy. We'll dig more into the data in a moment, but just by way of recap, so we had run an exercise to identify key job roles using our Emsi titles, open library of job titles, and that resulted in the identification of over 360 different unique job titles categorized into a number of groups here, and we'll dive into those categories in a moment to get an understanding of the sorts of roles and demand for those roles. But actually, the critical factor has been in trying to unpick skills, and we've identified within our library of skills over 100 specific green skills that we can see predominantly in green jobs, so specifically green job titles, but actually the greenification, as we're talking about and coining the phrase, of more traditional jobs, things like gas engineers, health and safety managers, where we're actually seeing green skills being explicitly mentioned in hiring activity. And actually, when we looked at the headline data, we were able to track job postings where green skills are identified within postings, as well as those green jobs, those green job titles. And whilst we have seen a growth in the job titles, that's the green line on your chart there, and a pickup in recent times, really actually green skills are a massive driver, and we're seeing those right across the economy. So we'll dive into these trends in a little more as we go. So this is where I hand back to you, Duncan, as you guide us through some further analysis where we've kind of taken those definitions and those headlines that we shared last time and started to kind of unpick some of the details within.
Yep, thank you, Andy. So as Andy said, we have further divided our green job category into 10 constituent groups. If I kind of just read them off in turn, conservation is what it sounds like, people who are looking after the natural environment. Education is, there are a number of jobs out there, not many, not a huge number, but that are specialised in environmental education, sometimes around various kind of, natural beauty areas, and sometimes going around education institutions as well. Energy efficiency are all those people who are installing new energy efficiency equipment and insulation and so on. That's a significantly bigger area. And then one of the largest is environmental health and safety, which is obviously becoming a much more of a big concern. On the top right there, environmental services, which is a range of activities that go on at local level, sort of between the kind of the waste and the regulatory sections, which we'll come on to in a moment. The regulatory section includes quite a wide range of people, because you've got people who are doing this sort of the tactical level of regulation in terms of inspecting and making sure that all plans are in place, but also the policy level people as well. And it's quite a big area when you sort of go from one level to the other, and you can see there sort of recent times it's been hitting around 800 job postings a month. Similar in size is renewable energy. And of course, we all see those kind of wind turbines around the country and solar panels as well. Science, obviously, sort of new research and technology in this area remains important. Technical are a range of jobs. So you can see this is the biggest category, getting above 1,500 job postings a month most recently, in terms of the technical skills necessary to produce environmental goods, install them, and so on. And then waste is covering, of course, that wide range around recycling, and of course that's a large one as well. What you can see is that in these job title trends, and they're all quite noisy because some of them are quite sort of niche categories, but you can see sort of two main factors here. One is that they're generally growing, as reflects the wider picture on green jobs, and that with two exceptions, they all suffered from last year's COVID impact. The exceptions there are energy efficiency, which seems to have had a minor blip down and then gone from strength to strength otherwise, and waste, which of course was a key services role, again a minor blip, but is otherwise maintained strongly. And so you can see that, you know, overall all aspects of the green economy continue to sort of be in good shape. The technical side and the renewable energy side have seen the fastest growth in recent times, whereas some of the others, things like conservation or science, are much more sort of moderate and sustained growth. And so, yeah, different stories around, but the general pattern remains the same, which is that, you know, green jobs are continuing to grow, even if some parts of it were impacted by COVID, as most parts of the economy were.
So does that, Duncan, does that reflect that when you look at conservation, that's been a sort of a long-standing area of the labour market before a lot of talk about build back better, etc., versus renewable investments that are now being made?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying that, you know, things like conservation have become big, you know. So I mean, the environmental movement sort of traces itself back sort of many decades, probably became very large sort of from the late 80s onwards. And so, yeah, and if you think about the sort of the number of you know, forestry attractions and things like that you get around the country, parkland, we're probably a bit better at sort of making the most of that than we used to be. And so, yeah, it has been a sort of continuing presence there. But yeah, it's these areas like renewable energy, which obviously the sort of we've seen a huge shift in energy production, so that now we have some days where we don't use coal power in this country for the first time since the Industrial Revolution. And so renewable energy has become an important part of the energy mix. And of course, energy efficiency is also becoming you know, more and more of the agenda. And of course, we hear all kinds of talk about plans the government might have for the future to sort of press further down that road. So yeah, it's a mix between these things that have been with us for a while. I mean, waste is another one where the big shift in recycling was really in the 2000s because of Europe-wide targets that were put onto local authorities to perform much better at recycling their waste. And so that's been a big part of that change, and now it's much more mainstream. So yeah, there's new areas, but there are also established areas. So yeah, so what we've done here, and again, this is using postings data because that's the only way we can get the level of granularity needed to really pick apart the green economy, is what I've done is for all the NUTS 3, so that's the county and unitary authorities across the country, I've plotted the number of postings as a share of the local total, and compared that to the national ones. It creates a location quotient, which is a measure of concentration. And you can see that environmental health and safety is unsurprisingly not that varied. I mean, there are variations. You get a little bit more here and there, sort of in North Wales, it's a bit higher. Northern Ireland does a bit better on this one, but it is much more kind of even because, of course, you need those kind of roles throughout. Whereas renewable energy is much more varied. And so you can see in the Highlands there, you know, sort of more than 4 times the number of job postings in that area than elsewhere. Some parts of Northern Ireland don't have any, which is why they appear to be entirely absent. And down in London, renewable energy jobs are very thin on the ground because, of course, there's not a lot of space there for wind turbines, for example. So that might be as you'd expect. And then on the right-hand side here, you've got the technical side, which is much more about sort of the production sector. And so you see Leicestershire, from where I'm speaking as we speak, is kind of relatively higher than the rest of the country, but then sort of Derbyshire to its north is a lot lower. Production sectors tend to be quite geographically varied, and so that's no surprise there as well. But yeah, so it shows that these different groupings can have quite different geographical patterns. And so we can also plot the same data in terms of looking at where the changes are. And so we've done this in volume terms, and you can see that because some of these groups are quite small, sometimes local authorities don't appear because they just don't have enough data either way. But you can see, for example, environmental health and safety's growth pattern is actually quite different to its by area. So although it is geographically consistent overall, there are some quite significant changes. I think that's Buckinghamshire and then sort of the Lancashire area that tend to be sort of seeing growth there. Renewable energy again has significant variations there with Devon, and I guess that's about Gloucestershire sort of area there. And then the technical side, you were going to say something there?
No, I was going to say that is Gloucestershire. Absolutely.
Yeah, my powers of recognition aren't too bad, it turns out. So and then again, Lancashire, that kind of area seems to be doing pretty well on the technical side, and so it does with I guess that would be Berkshire, that branch coming out from London there, and then somewhere in East London seems to also have a bit of a hotspot in terms of a change there. So again, you can see how because the data is localized, we can plot out the sort of the most distinctive areas, both in terms of current recruitment demand, but also how it's changing over time. So the same 10 groups, we also have groups of skills that associate with them. And so the way that we did these was we took the job titles that were in each group and we looked for the skills that were most concentrated within them compared to the wider population of job postings. And so we're not always looking for the ones that are the most voluminous, but the ones that seem to really differentiate that group of job titles from the rest. We did some manual curation to make sure that there were no non-green skills in there. And again, you get a pretty similar pattern. In fact, one of the interesting things is that the COVID dip is more consistent across the groups than it was with the job titles, perhaps reflecting a sort of a broader base that you get when looking at skills. But again, you can also see that growth is fairly sort of consistent across the piece as well. And you can see, for example, energy efficiency has really grown well, technical skills have really grown well, whereas renewable energy skills are a bit more even than the job title search suggests. So, an interesting mix when compared to the job title. But what we can then go on to see, if you go on to the next one, is that we can also use these skills to look at where these skills demands are coming from in terms of the types of job. And so what we've done for each of these skills groups is look at the sort of the mix of them between the 9 one-digit SOC major groups. And so I thought this was an interesting thing to do, because one of the things that often gets said about green jobs and green skills demands is that they're jobs of the future and therefore they're going to be high quality jobs. And to some extent, there's some truth in this, at least insofar as we often refer to managerial and professional and technical jobs as being high quality jobs, which is generally fair because they tend to be paid better, for example, and tend to be a little more secure. And you can see that in all groups, professional jobs tend to be sort of the dominant source of demand. But in some of these groups, you can see that it's not the whole story. And so if you look at environmental services, say, you've got quite a significant demand for skilled trades and process plant and machine operatives. In waste, you've got a combination of skilled trades, process plant and machine operatives, and elementary roles, which are sort of the lowest skilled roles. Renewable energy also has a lot of skilled trades demand there. And then environmental health and safety and energy efficiency also have quite a lot of skilled trades demand and some of those lower skilled demands too. And so overall, and bearing in mind that job postings does have a slight bias toward the higher skill end, simply because of the way that employers advertise. So overall, you can see that although there is some truth to the idea that green job demand tends to be at the higher quality end, it's not the whole story. And there are significant middle and lower skilled jobs going to be created over time, looking for those green skills. And so it's not just a sort of a high skill, high quality job scenario that we're looking to address.
I think it's a fascinating reinforcer of why it's good to look at that skill level, where we're seeing those skills right across the economy, as opposed to job titles or occupations above that, in that we do see some of those nuanced trends coming through, and can see where there's perhaps a demand for upskilling an existing workforce, as well as creating whole new job roles and new talent for future jobs, as you say. So it's not just the preserve of the high skilled end of the labour market. There's an opportunity pretty much right across the board to become more involved and influential in the green revolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good, thanks. Well, that's been a fascinating kind of tour of understanding where we find these job roles and skills, both geographically, but also within different categories and levels within the labour market. So I'm going to now jump in and dive into a couple more localities, and feel free, Duncan, to add some colour to any of my commentary as we go through before we summarise. But these reports are actually taken from the green reports, which I'll talk about a bit later on, that you can access for yourself for your local area. And I thought it'd be interesting to just quickly compare and contrast a few different areas with some of these headline trends. So within these reports, for each of basically the LEP geography in England plus the devolved nations, we've got reports that summarize a lot of the statistics that we've been sharing with you around these green job roles and green job skills. And some of those stats look into earnings. So the top left graph is looking at advertised salaries in relation to green job roles relative to the rest of the labour market. And we mentioned last time out that generally we see a bump in the advertised salaries within the UK as a whole, but we can see that regionally here for London in terms of the advertised salaries of green jobs relative to the average of the whole of the labour market. But it's interesting to see also, as we go through a few of these examples, the top right graph, where we can see what are the roles that are actually driving greatest employer demand. So you had picked out, Duncan, earlier that the growth of technical roles in London, and what we can see here now is a breakdown of those job titles that are driving jobs over the last 12 months in London. What we can see is a strong predominance of those consultants, of analysts. So really aligned, I suppose, to the professional services end of this agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, to some extent, that's what you'd expect within London, because of course, you know, if you think about some of the categories we've got around the regulatory dimension, for example, and some of the technical specialisms as well, they will kind of really pick up in the London area, because that's where most of our professional services locate. And of course, when it comes to regulatory, it's where the sort of the policy making centre of the country is.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we look at the skills that we're seeing alongside those roles, of course, we're not just hiring people with just green skills. We want well-rounded individuals. And it's interesting to see when we look on the bottom left there to reinforce exactly what you're describing, particularly on the planning side. So we've got planning, we've got infrastructure as well. So these are really tying together to build out that big picture. And then on the right side, there a few more kind of key hard skills as opposed to the more general common skills that we see right across the labour market. Some of the more specific technical and harder skills there, again reinforcing particularly around built environment and risk analysis.
And again, they tend to be quite strategic in their outlook as well. If you think about, you know, their broad concepts around sustainability and risk analysis and environmental resource management, so they are kind of the broader conceptual skills that are important in the sort of the professional end of green, as opposed to some of the more kind of detailed level operational skills that you might see in some of the other categories.
Yeah, absolutely. So shooting north, but staying within an urban area, we're looking at Greater Manchester now. And again, we can see the green jobs salary bump there, different advertised salary rates relative to London, but still quite a differential and quite a different mix. Some similarities in job titles, but also starting to see a slightly different mix there. But again, perhaps that urban professional services and population, certainly with recycling managers coming out top, kind of suggests the element of serving a high population as much as they're thinking about the professional services end of big city employers.
Yes, that's right. And that's the thing. I mean, that, the contrast here is quite useful in a way, because Manchester is a more normal larger city, and so the infrastructure dimension sort of becomes more obvious that you'd find in a major urban centre, whereas London has that kind of additional layer on top of those professional roles.
Yeah, and that international centre really in a lot of things. So, so you heard it here first. Greater Manchester is a more normal city, so that's good news.
Every city is less normal in its own way, I'm sure.
Moving ever further north, and obviously we've got Scotland as a whole here for the purpose of these reports, but we saw earlier, of course, the predominance certainly in the Highlands of the renewable energy side and infrastructure side, and we can see that once again dominating in the roles, particularly wind turbine technicians there coming through.
Yeah.
And again, a significant wage differential in terms of advertised salaries there. So
absolutely, and of course we saw earlier on when it came to the renewable energy side, the way that the Highlands just jumped out as being so much more stronger, and of course sort of Scotland's natural environment gives it a lot of assets in terms of the renewable energy side of things, which of course are being taken advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely, and you mentioned about the environmental assets. Interesting on the bottom right, when we look at some of the top in demand technical or hard skills, environmental impact assessment coming through strongly there. So
yeah, exactly, and yeah, that, and then you've also got environmental laws, and so auditing is in there as well, and ISO 14000. So it becomes a little bit more at the sharper end technically, as opposed to the sort of the sort of slightly kind of more strategic skills that you saw in London.
Absolutely, and just to finish off our quick whistle-stop tour of Great Britain, we're coming further down the coast again, but to a more rural region, where again we saw the predominance of perhaps the renewable energy side of things. So diving into Cumbria again, significant advertised salary differential, and we can see in the top right there the wind turbine technicians and engineering being a big driver. And of course we know Cumbria has a strong base of engineering more generally, and particularly in the energy sector. So
especially around nuclear, which we might not think of itself as the greenest of energy sources, although it's certainly low carbon, but of course they do put a lot of effort into managing the environmental impact of that, and so that will have an impact on demand.
And again, in the technical skills coming through, thinking about engineering and safety standards, risk analysis. So significant show of specific skills coming through there that are again a bit aligned to the industry base that's embracing the green technology potential.
Yes, exactly.
Great. So that's just a quick whistle-stop tour. These reports, as I say, are available, and we'll talk a bit more about those. So having kind of thrown a number of charts and tables at you, Duncan, can you quickly help us kind of maybe pick through some of the key themes that we've explored this time?
Yeah, sure. I think, building on what we saw last time with the aggregate trend, I think what we've done by looking at the sort of 10 component groups that we've built out within those, what you really see is that growth is common across the green economy. And so it's not simply a matter of that, say renewable energy is growing, but other areas are stagnant or in decline. It's actually that it's a sort of a commonly held thing. Now, some are growing faster than others. That's certainly the case. Conservation is a lot more moderate in growth, but it's still growing. And then you have got these fast growing areas, and most of them were impacted by the COVID downturn, as most of the economy was. Energy efficiency and waste were the sort of the least affected, but even then to an extent. On the skills side, everywhere was affected, but again, growth is really quite clear across all those groups. Next point there, and this is where localized data really comes to the fore, is that the nature of green jobs demand varies by region, and those 10 groups allow us to really unpick those. And so we can see, for example, that renewable energy is concentrated rather obviously in those areas where we can generate lots of renewable energy. And so the Highlands really sort of stands out there, but there are other parts of the country which do much better, whereas we saw that in London it was much lower because, of course, there's not a lot of room to put many wind turbines in London, for example. The technical roles are growing in larger cities, mainly because of professional services as well. And so, yeah, where there are other areas like environmental health and safety, for example, which are much more even across the piece because every area needs some degree of that kind of role. Then that third point there is that the demand for green skills is concentrated into professional and professional technical roles, and that's true. But there are some important exceptions, and so it's important not to run away with the idea that all green jobs demand is at the high skill end and only creating high quality jobs. There are, quite a lot of coverage among skilled trades roles, especially renewable energy and environmental services. But the lower skilled roles are also important too, and waste and recycling is an obvious one. Environmental services more generally. So, it's important to say that there is a mix of jobs here, and I think that can be a strength actually. That we want to be able to create jobs at all levels because we have workers at all levels of skill, and so if the green economy is to sort of be a big driver of jobs, we need to be creating them at all levels too. And it's important, therefore, not to run away with the idea that we only need graduates with green skills. We actually need green skills across the spectrum.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much for helping us navigate that and some interesting data. So thanks for pulling that together for us, Duncan. So a reminder that, of course, the point of putting these webinars out is to share what we're discovering, and hopefully it's helpful to the work that you're doing. But there's a lot more we can help you with, and we're keen to support you in the work that you're doing around this agenda and about the labour market more widely. As we saw with the walkthrough there, there's a wealth of data now that you can really dive into, and the big challenge, I think, for a lot of us is thinking about, well, what does the green economy look like for our neck of the woods? And clearly from that analysis we can see there isn't just a uniform view of this is the green economy and everyone's got it. It actually varies quite significantly in different parts of the country, across different segments of that of the definition of the green economy. And so, as hopefully you are picking up, the data that we're pulling together, and it is really about illuminating that, and we want to help you. If you're already an Emsi Burning Glass customer, then we can certainly guide you in that. But of course, if you're not, we'd be delighted to help you understand your place, understand the opportunities, and also the challenges. This is a new part of, this is a growing part of the economy, and it can only grow if we have the right talent and skills, infrastructure to support that. And so it's the key driver to why we want to highlight all of this, and we want to empower you to have that kind of information so that you can drive your important decisions and partnership explorations there. So please do feel free to reach out if you want to learn more about that. We'd be delighted to help. I mentioned throughout that, and we announced this on the last webinar, but we have now made available a set of those regional and localized green economy reports, providing a headline of what the green economy looks like in different localities. Feel free to head across to economicmodelling.co.uk/green-economy. You'll find the national overview report there for the whole of the United Kingdom, and you can request your local areas report too. So if you haven't already done that, we've had hundreds of people already reach out to us, which is really exciting. But if you've yet to do that, then head along there and make your request. Got some exciting breaking news as well coming through. So in fact, now available in your analyst tool should be those green job titles and green skills groups. You should find them in your template groups, and when you're running job postings analysis within your analyst tools, you should now be able to pull forward the green job titles or green skills groups pre-populated into your analyst system. So for all our analyst customers out there, hopefully we can save you a bit of time having to plug those hundreds in manually. So great news there, and thank you to our product colleagues who have worked hard to get that in quickly while we're talking about this. So go in, have a look. If you can't find it, give your account manager a shout. Of course, hopefully for those that aren't yet analyst tool users, this is yet another temptation as to why it'd be great to dive into that and find out how we can get you up and running there. So making your lives hopefully a lot easier. And what's more, this year, given the environment that we've faced, we're actually doing a mid-year update to our core labour market data. which is now available in beta form within your analyst system, so you can pick that from the list of data sets. It's still being final tested, but we've had a good play with it, and in fact tomorrow we'll be releasing a blog article announcing this fact, so you heard it here first, and sharing a few updates. Duncan, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what's kind of driving that one?
Yeah, so obviously because we are in a fast-moving situation, we want to be able to integrate the sort of the latest possible data into our tools. And so what we've done is, so normally when we release our new data run at the start of the year, the previous year, so 2020 in this case, is based on the data that we have most recently available at that point, which is really up to Q2 of 2020. And because that's really early days in terms of COVID, we wanted to be able to update it. And so by doing that now, we've got Q4 data from ONS to add in, and that gives us a more rounded view of what's going on. It should be said that because of furlough, the changes aren't huge, but there are some there, some areas, the sort of the damage is a bit more clear cut. The data that we're using for that year is still quite high level, sort of NUTS 1 region, and then we use that to reshape the data at local level, but that hinges on BRES data, which is only released once a year. So it's kind of not as complete an update as we wish we could give you, but it is making sure that we're making the best use of the available data as of now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've said throughout, obviously the structural data tends to move slightly slower and there's a little lagged behind what's happening day to day. But of course, that's why we've been focusing so hard on what we've learned from the job postings data in particular. And so this is our way of nudging the dial a little, and we'll, as I say, share a bit more about what we've seen in that data. But it will still be a little while until we see the true profound effects on what the structural building blocks are to the economy. But as you say, with what we saw right at the front of this session, actually it might not quite be as extreme as we might have guessed as the news was breaking on the first lockdown. So will be fascinating to see, but we'll ensure that you're using the latest possible data when you're using data in Emsi tools for you. So that's a good sign there. We will come to questions in a moment, so I'm just prepping Debbie to be the question master, but we're going to take a break despite the fact that I'm already on holiday. We're going to take a holiday break, and with August being a prime time, I think all of us have deserved a bit of time off after the run we've been on in the last 12 months or so. So I hope you do have a great break. We'll come back with our next webinar, continuing in the theme of kind of the building back better and what the labour market looks like as we respond to the pandemic. We will be switching our gaze from a very specific deep dive, as we have done today and last month, on the green agenda, and actually thinking more broadly about the STEM economy, which of course has been a big focus for us. So be delighted to join us on the 22nd of September as we return to the fold. I believe that you can register already at the webinars page, which is listed above. And then finally, we have in our economic development team, Will Cookson and Martin Gerard are actually going to be diving in, building on some of the analysis we've been doing over the last few months, but really thinking about how you can utilize Emsi data to understand skills gaps in the local economy. So as we clearly are seeing things revving back up, how well prepared are you as a local enterprise partnership or a local authority to understand where the pinch points might be from a talent perspective and what you can then do to influence that. So be sure to sign up to that session on the 7th of September. It's sure to be an interesting one for sure. So we've got that coming up shortly. So Debbie, I think that's us now, and really over to whether we have any questions that Duncan or I can attempt to answer on behalf of our audience.
Sure thing. Yeah, just a couple. First of all, probably for Duncan, does the technical cover, when you talk about the technical in the green skills, does it cover manufacturing of green equipment and machinery? Is that the sort of, would that come under technical?
Yeah, I think it's a range of those kind of skills, including people who are consulting on green solutions, but also those that are making green tools as well. Remember, this is skills driven, so sometimes those people that are making green products aren't necessarily looking for green skills, weirdly, because they are looking for manufacturing skills to make things. So yeah, so but if they're to be anywhere within those groups, it would be there, yes.
Okay, cool. And obviously I think we've might have covered this before on the last webinar, but do you think with the redundancy figures, they're low because of the furlough scheme, sorry?
Yeah, I think that they have been lower than they would have been were it not for the furlough scheme. I think now it's different. I think now it's because demand is bouncing back. And so actually, if you're a business that hadn't already lost workers, you're actually now looking to sort of recover or grow. And so to some extent, it's almost like we sort of had our foot on the brake and then we've taken it off and we're putting it onto the accelerator. And so it's almost like a lot of employers have suddenly found themselves wanting their staff back very quickly in a way that we're not used to in a recovery, because normally it takes several years. And so people have gone in that time. So I think that, yeah, furlough meant that it wasn't necessary to lose as many people, but now it's actually because demand is recovering really strongly, and all the indicators suggest that. And as I said earlier, the IMS view is that the economy should grow really smartly this year.
Right, okay. The other thing is, I'm sure this is possible. Sorry, Andy, did you want to?
If I might jump in on that first, a really good first question, actually, because I think one thing that's probably important for us to share is we don't think necessarily the list of job titles or those skills are absolutely exhaustive. I think to your point, Duncan, there are roles that might not be described as green manufacturing roles that are just happen to be manufacturing what we might think of as green products, and yet not be mentioned in the job title or even necessarily in the skills. And so it's not going to be truly exhaustive. We're looking for what we can find. And I think, yes, I've always felt it's quite interesting when you think about recruiting for assembly line technicians in the vehicle production industry, and you can have within the same factory and people largely doing the same work, someone building a gas guzzling SUV 4x4, and then and then the next week be on the line for the next electronic vehicle. Yes, of course there will be some niche skills within that, but there also will be a lot of commonality, and you may not necessarily come through in the job posting itself. So think of this as a guide rather than an exhaustive list, but hopefully a better guide than not having one at all.
Exactly.
And so all this, these tables and information analysis will be available in the analyst tool. I'm correct in thinking that, aren't I?
Absolutely, yeah. So you'll be able to run these groups of job roles or skills over any job postings data within Analyst, just pulling through the group. So yeah, you can dig in and really get into the weeds on that yourselves for sure.
Yeah, great. Okay, and just to say, with the follow-up email that everybody will be receiving, they will be getting the slides and the recording, as I mentioned earlier, but also a link to the reports so that they can download those. So just to add that in there. Other than that, thank you, Andy and Duncan. That was great. No more questions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, let me just close off. Thank you, Duncan, very much for your contribution once again, and Debbie for hosting us. Thank you to you all for joining us live, and for those watching back, hope you find it useful. Feel free to reach out if you have any further questions. I am preparing myself to head back to the seaside, and I feel like an ice cream is calling, even though it's very cloudy and very windy, but I'm British, so I will have ice cream at the seaside. Cool. So you all a very good summer. Thank you very much, and see you all soon.
See you soon.